Have you ever stared at a blank lesson plan template, overwhelmed by the ticking clock? Your prep is almost over and you don't know what you're going to do. Well, I've been there, and today I'll show you how to design engaging lessons in 30 minutes or less. So the reality is that teachers are stretched pretty thin as it is, trying to balance planning, grading, meetings, IEPs. A lot of teachers are also coaches. They're active in their church, and spouses and kids. There's just so much going on that it's important to be efficient when planning out your lesson plan. So I'm going to give you a 5-step lesson planning framework that's going to help you develop those engaging lessons without taking up a lot of your time. I'm John Van Duzen. I've been an elementary and middle school teacher since 2007, as well as a coach. I'm also an officer in the United States Army Reserves, where I serve as an instructor for the Command and General Staff College. Teacher PD is designed to give fast lessons for busy teachers. Let's get after it. Let's get into the 5-step quick lesson planning framework. Step 1, start with the end in mind. In the Army, we call this backwards planning, where we start with the primary objective as the endpoint, and then we work backwards from that objective to the beginning of the lesson. And in my school, we're a Marzano school, so we use I can statements. So at the beginning of the lesson, we start with I can, and then we state whatever that is. So I can describe the 5 parts of the Declaration of Independence. That's how we start our lesson, with the end in mind. And that gives you a good framework to start with that, where most students are going to be on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being they can't do it at all, a 4 they could teach a friend. They're going to be a 1 because you haven't taught the lesson yet. But it also gives you a guide at the end of the lesson where you can assess growth, either informally by just having students hold up 3 or 4 fingers, depending on where they are, or formally with some type of exit ticket or quiz. So step 1 is start with the end in mind. Step 2, choose an engaging hook. Some kind of thought-provoking question, a short video clip, a riddle, something to get the students thinking. So in my Army class, in an adult learning model, we use usually short video clips or a picture, and we call it a concrete experience. And the whole idea is to take whatever you are going to learn and connect it or anchor it to something that the students already know. Well, that works in the middle school and elementary classroom too. It's just a matter of what the students know. A 3rd grader is going to know less than an 8th grader. So you just need to find some kind of content that you can anchor to what they already know and then expand with whatever your lesson is. Step 3, plan the core activity. And this focuses on some form of active learning, whether the students are interacting with you, whether they're interacting with some kind of material, whether that's websites, YouTube videos, podcasts, textbooks, or whether they're engaging with each other, depending on the types of questions that are being asked of them. Different ways to do this collaboratively would be to do a think, pair, share model, where students are going to think about their own answer and then pair up with somebody else. It doesn't have to be at their table. It can be at someone from a different desk or a different table. This also engages their motor functions, so they get up and move. Even in 8th grade, I'm a firm believer that students need to move. So get them up out of their chairs, have them pair up with somebody from across the room and share what they are thinking about. So that's think, pair, share. You can also do what we call jigsaw, where if you have, let's just say 5 groups of 5 kids, and then you number them 1 through 5, and then you jigsaw, where you break them up and all the 1s go together, all the 2s go together, all the 3s go together, and so on. So they get 2 different small groups, and they not only get to share their ideas, but they get to hear the ideas from 2 other small groups. So the core activity needs to have some kind of collaborative learning. I like to use movement. You can also integrate technology such as Blookits, Quizlets, or Kahoots. And I have a couple of videos that I'll post in the show notes that show how to use those tools. And also you can engage students using Google Slides or Padlet, or even just taking simple notes. I found that the active students taking notes with you on the board helps engage them not just with you, but also with the material. And then it also helps them engage with each other at the end when you tell them to go through their table and make sure everybody has all of the notes. Step 4, assess their learning or growth. So again, there's informal ways you can do this by simply asking the question. You can do more formal assessments with exit tickets or some form of mini quiz, which you can set up really easy on Socrative. This is also a great place for that Kahoot or possibly just a Google form if you're limited on time that says, tell me what you learned today. And that leads right into step 5, which is reflection. And I am a firm believer that students need to reflect on what they just learned. I also use that reflection period at the beginning of the class period to review or reflect on what we learned the previous day. So a couple different strategies. It can be discussing at your table. We can go back to that think, pair, share model. You can do a 2-minute reflection journal, class discussion, even the simple question of write down one thing that you learned and one question that you still have, just to get the students to think about what they learned and think about what they're thinking about, which sounds a little weird, but it's important to think about what you're thinking about. So to review the 5-part lesson plan, start with the end in mind, backwards plan. Step 2, choose an engaging hook. Step 3 involves your core activity. Step 4 involves assessment. And step 5 is a built-in reflection time. So now let's go into how are we actually going to do this? What are we going to use? Personally, I like to use a pre-made lesson template that I have used for the last few years, and I have a video to that, and you can go to my website, johnvanduzen.com, and actually look at that video and download a free sample. But I know a lot of teachers use some form of document, spreadsheet, Google Forms inside of Google Classroom, and everything in Google Classroom is their repository for information. I also know other teachers that use Canva, so their lesson designs not only show up on the board, but show up in a attractive manner. And the last thing I would put in the tools and resources portion of this would be to share plans with your colleagues and build some kind of resource bank. You can easily do that on Google Drive. If you have multiple teachers teaching the same content, you can make a shared Google Drive. And the biggest challenge you're going to have with that is naming conventions. So if you get with those other teachers, just make sure that you're naming everything in a similar fashion so that it doesn't just become a big wasteland of materials. Common challenges that can come with building a fast, engaging lesson can be feeling like you're rushed and leaving out key elements. For this challenge, I would suggest that you concentrate on the core activity. If you have started with the end in mind and you build the core activity, you can really adjust your plan from there and go a little faster or go a little slower depending on how much time you have and how the class is doing. Another challenge you may have, especially if you're doing something new, is that students may not be engaged with your activity because they just don't like the content. I teach history. I have students all the time that say they don't like history. So I will take an activity and I'll actually start that activity using some kind of current event or some kind of student interest to get them going to understand how the engagement works, and then we'll bring in the content. And the last challenge I'd like to address is just becoming stale. If you're trying to do the same thing every day, following a format, try to mix it up a little bit. Try to be a little vulnerable in what you're doing. If you've never used a Kahoot before, if you've never used a Blooket, if you've never done a Jigsaw or a Think, Pair, Share, give it a shot. Maybe it'll work out great and you'll have a new tool in your toolbox. And if it doesn't work, well, you know that didn't work. And you'll know to either adjust it or try something different. And I'll end with this. You do not need hours to create an effective lesson, just a clear focus and a few practical tools. Hopefully this 5-step framework has helped you out. So what's your go-to lesson planning tip? How do you be efficient? How do you use your time wisely? Share in the comments, find me on social media, or visit johnvanduzen.com. And keep this conversation going. As I mentioned before, there's some other videos related to this topic that I'll post in the comments. And thanks for stopping by Teacher PD. Fast lessons for busy teachers.